Great. Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's really a pleasure to be here, although I have to say it's a bit intimidating to know that the last senior State Department official here was Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. I do not pretend to live up to that, but I will do my best talking about a very specific aspect of what the United States government does in regards to promoting human rights at the UN Human Rights Council. And of course, we're absolutely delighted that Ireland has also been elected to sit for a 3-year term on the Human Rights Council. In November 2012, the U.S. was elected to a second term, actually, on the Human Rights Council. We were, as I said, very pleased to see our friends, Ireland, who were elected as part of the Western Europe and Other group, which is the regional group to which our countries belong and participate in different UN mechanisms. The U.S. certainly views Ireland as a strong champion of human rights, and Ireland's campaign and its successful election is a natural follow-on, I think, to Ireland's strong leadership as chair in office of the Organization on Security and Cooperation in Europe, which has many, many important human rights components as well. Today, maybe I'll start out and just talk a little bit about some of the progress that we've seen at the Human Rights Council, as well as the issues that we expect to come up in future sessions, and how, frankly, we expect sort of this partnership with Ireland and other members of the Human Rights Council are going to be crucial to continue to strengthening the Council's ability to fulfill its fundamental role, which is protecting and defending human rights. The U.S. and Ireland definitely share a concern about many of our most pressing challenges, whether it's the ongoing violence that's taking place in Syria, the troubling conduct of regimes in places like Iran and Belarus, in North Korea, both the opportunities as well as some of the disappointments and the pitfalls that have come out of the Arab Spring, the need for countries like Sri Lanka to address issues of reconciliation and accountability. All of those are issues that we share, and addressing these issues will certainly require our collective attention and resolve at the Human Rights Council. For those of you who are not familiar with the Human Rights Council, let me just provide you a little bit of background. The Human Rights Council is an international body within the United Nations system. It's responsible for the promotion and protection of global human rights and addressing situations of human rights violations. It is made up of 47 member states elected by the United Nations General Assembly. So these are all UN member states. It is a political body, sort of like a global parliament, if you will, on human rights issues. And since joining the Council in 2009, I would say, quite honestly, the U.S. has helped transform the Council into a more balanced and credible organization. It's helped focus the global spotlight on grave human rights violations, particularly in country-specific situations, but also in really key thematic areas as well. Some of the Council's accomplishments include adopting the first ever United Nations resolution protecting the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered persons, as well as a landmark resolution on the promotion and protection of freedom of assembly and association, which was led by the U.S. The Council also renewed previously lapsed Special Rapporteur mandate to highlight the deteriorating human rights situation in Iran. It actually was the first new country-specific mandate that was passed at the Council since the Council was created in 2006 to replace the old UN Commission on Human Rights. If you're not familiar with the role of a special rapporteur, it's not, I think, commonly thrown around language, at least in the United States. I'm not sure how it plays in Ireland. Let me tell you what they are. A special rapporteur is essentially an expert. It's an individual who's given a mandate by the Council to examine, to monitor, to advise, and publicly report on allegations and instances of human rights violations. So these individuals act independently of the government, of any government, and they therefore lend a certain level of credibility to reporting on human rights issues that any one single government or even any one organization, non-governmental or otherwise, can bring to a situation. Just a few words then on some of the specific issues that we've been dealing with at the Council, and which are also likely to be recurring issues going forward. First of all, obviously on Syria, which of course is on everyone's mind as the biggest ongoing threat to people's human rights, I would say, in the world today. The Human Rights Council has actually been one of the most active and vocal international bodies condemning the atrocities in Syria. Unlike, of course, the Security Council, which famously has not been able to come consensus on this issue, the Human Rights Council doesn't necessarily function by consensus, it functions by votes. So you can vote through a resolution on a country without having all members of the council agree on that. The council has also held 4 special sessions on the Syria situation, and most importantly, it established an independent international commission of inquiry, as well as a special rapporteur to follow up on the work of the Commission of Inquiry once its mandate expires. The Commission of Inquiry is basically a group of individuals, like a group of special rapporteurs, but it's more than one person. So it's a body that's been set up to function like a special rapporteur, but with a larger capacity. This Commission of Inquiry, not surprisingly, has not been granted permission to interview victims actually inside Syria. However, it has done an extensive amount of work interviewing individuals who have fled Syria and who are essentially living as refugees in neighboring countries. The Council to date has adopted 8 separate resolutions on Syria since 2011, all of which were co-sponsored by the United States, as well as all members of the EU and the WEOG group, and all of which sharply and repeatedly criticized and illuminated the conduct of the Syrian government, as well as highlighting abuses that are being taken, that are taking place by other actors in the conflict. The only 3 countries who have consistently voted against these resolutions, China, Russia, and Cuba, have actually had to rotate off the Council for 1 year, and so this upcoming March session may be the first time that a resolution is actually adopted by consensus on the Council. Another country-specific situation that, well, obviously you will all know well is the situation on Iran. In 2011, the U.S. led the Council in adopting a resolution that reinstituted a mandate of a special rapporteur on Iran to highlight the country's deteriorating human rights situation. The special rapporteur has been speaking out on behalf of Iranians who have suffered grave violations. We will be seeking an extension of that special rapporteur's mandate at this upcoming session in March, and certainly we'll look for Ireland's help and assistance in expanding that mandate and hopefully even gaining the number of votes in the Human Rights Council that support this particular mandate. North Korea is another area where the Human Rights Council has been very active and has issued a number of resolutions, as well as has maintained a mandate of a special rapporteur. As in the case of Iran and Syria, unfortunately, these mechanisms have not been allowed access by the state under review. Nonetheless, they have been able to produce a great deal of documentation on abuses that take place. That documentation can continue to be used by those in the international community to lobby on behalf of some kind of accountability process at some point, and frankly can be used as evidence in such an accountability process if it ever takes place. Another country issue that's been a big priority of the United States, and surprisingly I think has been the hardest issue that we've brought forward at the Council, has been on Sri Lanka. And for those who don't know, Sri Lanka has been really important for us for a couple of reasons. One is that in some ways, the Council's actions on Sri Lanka before the United States joined the Human Rights Council, I think is one of the most shameful actions that the Council had taken place to date. In 2009, largely EU-led group of countries called for a special session on Sri Lanka after the conclusion of the civil war, hoping to issue a strong resolution that would call on the government itself to engage and accept an independent investigation as to what took place. Unfortunately, what ended up happening is that special session was sort of hijacked by Sri Lanka and its allies, and instead of a resolution that called on the country to engage in this process of investigating what took place, it instead essentially congratulated the Sri Lankan government on the successful conclusion of the civil war and placed all the blame for any human rights abuses or atrocities on the opposing LTT, the Tamil forces. So I think it was really critical last year to be able to pass a resolution that did call on the government to accept the kinds of recommendations that had been put forward by the Commission on Sri Lanka. It was very, very difficult It was a very close vote. It was a vote where we literally didn't know the outcome until the day of the vote. And it was critically important to get countries like India, who typically are very hesitant to ever join on any kind of country-specific resolution at the council, to say, yes, we are going to vote in favor of this resolution. And that's largely what led to the success of that. I would say it was also really critically important that Indian civil society organizations put tremendous pressure on their own government to vote yes on this resolution. So if you think of Geneva as sort of this bubble city far away where you can't have an impact, in fact, I'd say some of the really critical resolutions have passed because civil society put pressure on their own governments to play a certain role at the Human Rights Council. And another issue that's been a huge priority for the United States, and which is a fiercely contested battleground in Geneva, is on anything related to freedom of expression. At the upcoming session of the HRC, the United States, along with Ireland and other EU members and other countries in the other regional organizations, are going to need to collaborate to maintain international consensus surrounding religious freedom and how you combat religious intolerance without negatively impacting freedom of expression. It's a really, really difficult issue. It's an issue we've been fighting for over a decade at the Human Rights Council, and it's an issue where I think we've finally achieved some positive consensus. However, every time there's a difficult incident, for instance, the video on the innocence of Muslims, it creates pressure on certain countries to say more needs to be done and to call for legal restrictions on freedom of expression. So our role has really been in trying to push that back and say, look, we hear you. There are real problems of human rights abuses against individuals on the basis of their religious belief, but restricting freedom of expression is not the way to address those. It's actually not helpful, and it's in direct violation of fundamental human rights. Maybe finally, I'll just say a few words about the LGBT resolution that I briefly mentioned earlier. The U.S., and I'm happy to say, has been and now will continue to be, with the second Obama administration, at the forefront of advancing the rights of LGBT persons. In June 2011, the Council adopted the first ever UN resolution on the rights of the LGBT persons. It commissioned a groundbreaking UN report on human rights abuses that LGBT persons face around the globe, and it really opened a broader international discussion on how to best promote and protect the human rights of LGBT persons. As a co-sponsor of this resolution, the United States demonstrated a commitment to playing an active role in ensuring the fair treatment and equality for all people. It also, I think, demonstrated a real adeptness at reaching out to non-traditional partners, in this case South Africa, and encouraging them to play an important role on a topic that is very, very tough throughout the African continent, but for which it's really critical to have African countries buy-in if we're going to reach consensus at the international level. And I've been talking now for quite a while about what the U.S. has seen as sort of priority issues at the Human Rights Council, but I realize the topic is why it matters that Ireland has joined the Human Rights Council. And here I will say that the answer is in many ways the same reason as to why it was right and important for the U.S. To run for a seat. In both of our countries, our basic human rights are generally respected. We're strong democracies in which our citizens have the ability to hire and fire our leaders. Although both of our countries definitely fall short on a range of human rights issues, and here I should say that when the U.S. falls short, it does so very publicly, and it is very widely known and talked about. We do both have domestic and regional remedies to address those issues when they arise. So some may argue that we're all better off fixing our own internal domestic country's problems and that engaging in these really tough battles in Geneva with countries who don't share often many of those values, like Russia, like China, like Egypt, only lends legitimacy to the idea that countries with poor human rights records should even be at the table in a discussion on human rights. I personally feel, and our administration feels, that this argument ignores an essential premise, and that is the premise that the universality of human rights is actually what matters. that it is not enough for those of us who have the good fortune to wake up every day in a country or region where our rights are generally respected, although not perfectly, but rather that basic human rights belong to every human being on this planet, and that all of us have a role to play ensuring that those rights are realized. And this means that we all equally have a role to play in ensuring that the world's only global human rights body actually does its job of advancing the realization of human rights in every part of the globe. I should say that for the first 3 years after the Human Rights Council was established to replace the Commission on Human Rights, the United States sat on the sidelines. It was frustrated by what it saw as a failed attempt to fully reform the UN's premier human rights body, and it was frustrated by the ability of rights-abusing countries to get elected to the Council. I spent those 3 years actually working for civil society and advocating that the US changed what I saw as an ill-conceived decision and to instead put its tremendous resources to the task of actually reforming the Council from within as an active member of the Council. In practical terms, this means not only being at the Council to sponsor and vote on resolutions in a way that promotes and advances human rights, it also means putting real political capital behind encouraging other members of the Human Rights Council to do so. And that's really what matters. When the US decided to run, basically everyone said, look, all you're doing is replacing Canada. Okay, you're going to vote the same way on most issues that Canada voted. But what was significant is that the US has the ability to put all of its embassies around the world into motion behind an issue that it cares about, and to bring that political capital to issues that it thinks are really significant. So it's not just a vote, it's also how many other votes you are able to bring to the table. I expect that Ireland will vote on resolutions in Geneva according to its conscience and in a manner that in many cases, although certainly not all, coincide with the goals and views of the United States. I think it's safe to say that we share a common set of values when it comes to human rights and a passion for believing those rights should belong to all people regardless of where they are born. And while Ireland as a small country will certainly not be able to lead or engage at every issue in Geneva, it is my hope that Ireland will be a leader on a set of issues it believes most strongly in, and it's willing to put its own political capital behind the difficult process of building consensus with other HRC members. Some say that the fact that countries with human rights records like China, like Russia, like Venezuela, like Syria, Libya, that they get elected to the Human Rights Council and it diminishes the legitimacy of the Council. In an odd way, I actually argue the opposite. I think their presence adds to it. The fact that any country in the world can get elected to the Human Rights Council by the UN General Assembly is why resolutions and actions that pass at the Council matter so much. It is not a given that a resolution on Syria, on Iran, on Sri Lanka, on LGBT issues, on freedom of association, it is absolutely not a given that these resolutions are going to pass at the Human Rights Council just because the US or the Western group of countries are in favor. In fact, the odds are actually stacked against our ability to dominate the agenda based on the regional makeup of the Council. Again, 47 countries, Western Europe and other group gets 7 seats out of 47. But it makes it that much powerful when the Council actually does pass a resolution on a country or issue, because doing so requires the building of cross-regional coalitions and therefore sets global norms on human rights that do ultimately lead to changes in how people see and how they demand their own rights from their governments and ask those governments to respond to those demands. So I would like to say I welcome Ireland to this hugely important and sometimes fiercely contested battlefield that is the Human Rights Council, oddly enough, and I look forward to seeing what leadership your country will take, and I look forward to seeing what directions you're going to push your country to take action on at the Human Rights Council. So I'll stop there.